Thanks, Sarah. And as Sarah indicated, the President did make the designation earlier today, announced it in the Cabinet meeting. And I think it's really just the latest step in a series of, as you can see, ongoing steps to increase the pressure. I call it the peaceful pressure campaign. The President calls it the maximum pressure campaign, so there's no confusion. They're one and the same. And I think this is, though, to hold North Korea accountable for a number of actions that they've taken over the last several months, the last year or so. Some of you will know that North Korea was designated as a state sponsor of terrorism back in 1988. So they have been designated before. That designation was lifted in 2008 as part of an effort to negotiate with North Korea an end to their nuclear program. That obviously failed because we can see where we are today. But as a result of actions they've taken, including assassinations outside of their country, using banned chemical weapons, these are all very, very serious actions on their part that put the public at risk as well. So that, along with a number of other actions that they've taken, resulted in their designation now again as a state sponsor of terrorism. I think, as Sarah indicated, the practical effect of it is we already have many of these actions in place through the current sanctions. It may, though, disrupt and dissuade some third parties from undertaking certain activities with North Korea, as it does impose prohibition on a number of other activities that might not be covered by existing sanctions. But I think, importantly, this is just continuing to point out North Korea's illicit, unlawful behaviors internationally, and we felt it necessary to reimpose the designation for that reason. So with that, happy to take questions, and I'm going to let Sarah referee because I'm no good at refereeing.
So good at it.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Mark, yes. Is this move an intent to incentivize Kim Jong-un towards negotiations? I think it's been more than 60 days since we've seen some kind of test. Do you think that that timetable is in any way promising? And why wait until we were back in the U.S.? The President said that there was hope for diplomacy when we were in Asia, and this seems to be counter that.
No, we still hope for diplomacy, and the timing of this is just one of us concluding the process. There is a very specific designation process that we have to go through at the State Department to be able to meet the criteria to make such a designation, and we wanted to ensure we had fully met all those requirements. Again, this is all part of just continuing to turn this pressure up, and we continue to turn the pressure up on North Korea by getting other countries to join and take actions on their own. We've had other countries in our visit to Vietnam. They have committed that they're going to curtail activities further with North Korea. Malaysia has indicated a curtailment. Singapore has cut off all trade with North Korea. The Philippines have cut off all trade. And just recently, the Deputy Secretary of State's been in Africa. He had meetings with the Sudanese government. The Sudanese government have traditionally been buying military weapons from North Korea. They now have agreed to halt all those purchases as well. So this is it's taking effect all around the world, and we think as it takes effect, again, this just continues to tighten the pressure on the Kim regime, all with an intention to have him understand this is only going to get worse until you're ready to come and talk.
Specific to the 60-day window, he hasn't tested in some time. You don't think this will trigger?
We're hopeful that he continues this quiet period. That's our objective, is that he continue to be quiet as well. This designation, as I said, is one that we're required to undertake from time to time, and we've been monitoring the situation. We wanted to be sure we had sufficient evidence before making the designation. So this is a process that started actually several months ago.
Thank you, Secretary. You mentioned that you're attempting to increase regional pressure against the North Korean regime. Do you have any indication that that is working? And if you haven't seen those indications just yet, how long before do you go down this path before the administration has to begin changing strategies?
Well, we get a lot of anecdotal information that it is working, and then we do have our own, intelligence sources as well. And then what the Chinese and others share with us, that I think the general belief is it is having a significant effect on North Korea. We know that there are current shortages of fuel based upon what we can gather from anecdotally, but also from certain intel sources. We know that that their revenues are down because a number of the revenue streams are being curtailed now. So I think it is having an effect. Is this the reason we haven't had a provocative act in 60 days? I don't want to suggest to you that I could say, but we're hopeful this period will continue. And again, I think the president in his address in Seoul, South Korea to the General Assembly, I thought he laid out the case very well to them, that he wanted them to come have talks because he wants to deliver a different future to the people of North Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I have a couple for you. The first is, can you give us an example of a third-party transaction that is now covered, that was not covered by either existing American sanctions or the UN Security Council sanctions?
Well, there could be certain dual-use equipment that may not have been covered under previous sanctions that this would prohibit now a third party selling that dual use. And so, and again, I don't want to suggest to you that the designation is something going to put a whole new layer of sanctions on them, because again, I think we already have North Korea so heavily sanctioned in so many ways with the UN resolutions that have been undertaken. But this will close a few additional loopholes off.
You and the President both referred to assassinations, plural. We obviously all know about the Kim Jong-nam assassination at the airport. Can you give us another example of another assassination on foreign soil?
I don't have anything that I can share with you specifically.
Secretary.
Thanks. There seems to be more unilateral U.S. sanctions against North Korea on the way. The Treasury's going to announce them tomorrow. Have you given up on getting China to agree to an oil embargo?
We've not given up, and let me say this with China, we continue to talk with them, first to ensure that they are fully committed to implementing all the UN sanctions, and they have assured us they are, which, as you'll recall, the last round of sanctions imposed a pretty severe restriction on the import of finished products, so fuels, petroleum, diesel, jet fuel, and whatnot. But we have suggested to them, look, you control that oil pipeline that feeds their refinery. You can do that unilaterally on your own if you want to increase that pressure. Whether they're doing that or not, we don't know, and it's very difficult for us to know whether they're taking actions to curtail oil supplies to them.
Secretary, earlier today, President Trump said that the Treasury Department is going to be announcing additional sanctions tomorrow. He described it as a very large one, the highest level of sanctions. Can you give us any insight into what those additional sanctions may be?
Well, I'd like to leave it to Treasury to announce those tomorrow. They're similar to sanctions we've taken in the past. We're just going out much more broadly now to more entities. But I'd like to leave it to their announcement tomorrow and not jump the gun on them.
And do you all see today's announcement as more symbolic or as something that really does have a lot of teeth to it?
Well, I think it is very symbolic on the one hand, because it just points out again what a rogue regime this is and how brutal this regime is and how little they care for the value of human life. So I think in that in of itself, I think makes a strong statement of just the nature of this regime. And as I've said, the practical effects may be limited, but hopefully we're closing off a few loopholes with this.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Maura Eliason from NPR. If China does not agree to cut off oil shipments to North Korea, how can you possibly get enough pressure on them to come?
Well, their fuel supplies are already quite constrained, and as I said, we have evidence that there are fuel shortages in North Korea. Obviously, the civilians are by and large the ones that can't get fuel, so we see long lines of vehicles at petrol stations. We see certain petrol stations that appear to be out of fuel because they're closed when normally they'd be open. So there are indications that fuel supplies are already quite tight. As you know, they only refined a small amount of their fuel needs internally. They only have one refinery that operates, and it operates at a low capacity. So they were heavily dependent on imports of finished fuel products, which have been constrained significantly with the UN sanctions.
But is the Chinese action essential? In other words, do you need China to cut off those oil shipments?
I don't know that the cutting off of oil is the magic wand or the silver bullet that is going to bring them to the table. What I would say is that the North Koreans have demonstrated in the past they have an enormous capacity to withstand a lot. They'll make their people pay, but they have an enormous capacity to withstand a lot. So I don't want to suggest that we think that one action is all it would take to get them to the table.
Thank you. Margaret Talbot with Bloomberg. Thanks to see you. Thanks for welcome in our briefing room many times. I want to pick up on Olivier's question about the assassinations. How determinative was that in the specific evidence they used to make this determination? And I also want to ask you, I think you and Ambassador Haley both spent some time with the president, and that's unusual. I know she was in town today. Can you tell us a little bit about that meeting and any substance that came up there?
Well, on the assassinations, the assassination in Malaysia was a significant event that caused us to really begin to look carefully at what else they might have been doing. As you know, that assassination involved the use of a chemical agent, a very dangerous agent, in a public place, and so that really got our attention. One of the things that we wanted to ensure is that we had a sufficient certainty around their role in that particular assassination. So we've been working with Malaysian authorities as well and been in conversation with them. Wanted to let them have their own process obviously play out as well. With respect to Ambassador Haley and I, we were just both in the cabinet meeting today.
So the threats, I know without getting too much into it that there had been a suggestion from the North Korean media about some violence directed toward the U.S. president. Was that a determinative factor at all in the decision to make a designation?
No.
Mr. Secretary, hi, Peter Baker, New York Times. Thank you for coming. You talked about assassination on foreign soil using a chemical agent. Russia has been accused of assassination on foreign soil, including using polonium in London. Should they be considered for the same sort of designation?
I think we have to consider every country that would take a substance like that and use it illegally.
Is there a process like that going on right now with Russia?
I don't want to comment on that.
Mr. Secretary, Trey Yanks with One American News. Two quick questions for you. How do you balance the impact of sanctions? You talked about the people of North Korea paying the price. Is this something you're considering when you talk about more sanctions towards the regime of Kim Jong-un?
Well, it's always a difficult choice you make when you impose sanctions in terms of who's really going to bear the burden here. The truth of the matter is the people of North Korea already live under enormously difficult conditions. And I think what we're focused on is a mission that's going to change North Korea's trajectory, change their path. That's the best way we can help the North Korean people in the future, is to have Kim Jong-un reverse his nuclear weapons program, allow us and the rest of the world to then engage with them in economic activity that will ultimately provide a better life for his people.
And my follow-up question, do you believe that the United States is running out of diplomatic options to respond to the nuclear threat of North Korea?
No, I do not.
We've got time for one last question. John Gizzy in the back.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You talked about the limited intelligence on North Korea and on the regime. Is there any evidence of any dissent within Pyongyang at all, or possibly reaction against the current government by other members of the Kim family even, or other opponents to him?
Well, I want to be a little careful about how I answer that. What I would comment on is you're well aware of a number of executions that have occurred within his inner circle and within many of the military people that are close to him. So I'll leave it to your own interpretation.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.